Hey, welcome to The Explainer, where we break down big ideas into something you can actually use. Today, we're going to dig into something fascinating. Why your absolute best thinking probably doesn't happen chained to a desk, but somewhere else entirely, on a path you might not expect.
So let's start with a puzzle you've probably asked yourself a million times. We're always told to just focus harder, right? To sit at our desks and grind until we solve a problem. But if that's true, why do our biggest breakthroughs, those aha moments, almost always happen when we step away? In the shower, on a walk, or just zoning out? It's a paradox.
This whole situation leads us to a very modern problem, something we can call the immobility trap. We've all been taught that to be focused, you have to be physically still. But a ton of evidence is starting to show that's not just wrong, it's the exact opposite of what our brains actually need.
Picture this, because I bet it sounds familiar. We create these little fortresses of focus, the perfect chair, the giant monitor, thinking that if we just stay put, we'll have a breakthrough. But what usually happens? We hit a wall. It's like mental gridlock, a dead end where fresh ideas just can't seem to find a way in.
And, there's actually a scientific name for this feeling of being stuck. It's called cognitive entrenchment. When you focus too hard on one thing for too long without a break, your thinking literally becomes rigid. Research has actually shown that staying seated for long periods can slash your cognitive flexibility by a whopping 40%. Think about that. Trying harder is literally making it harder to think outside the box.
Okay, so if sitting still is the enemy of innovation, what's the answer? Well, it's actually beautifully simple, and it all starts with just getting up on your own 2 feet.
It turns out some of the greatest minds in history were way ahead of us on this one. They knew a secret we've kind of forgotten: the power of thinking while you're moving. From Darwin, who had a special thinking path, to Steve Jobs, who held some of his most important meetings for Apple while walking, history is just full of geniuses who did their best work on the move. And look, this isn't just some cute story about old geniuses. Nope, it's backed by some serious science. A huge study from Stanford University found that the simple act of walking boosts creative output by an average of 60%. I mean, 60%. That's not just a little bump, that's a total game changer unlocked just by moving your body. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Walking doesn't just boost all thinking across the board. It's really good for one specific type: divergent thinking. That's your brainstorming, your what-if ideas, generating tons of possibilities. Now, for convergent thinking, where you need to zero in on one single correct answer, well, for that, sitting in a quiet room is actually better. So the big takeaway here is simple. Match your movement to the kind of thinking you need to do. Walk to brainstorm, sit to focus. All right, so moving our bodies is huge, but it's only half the story. The other half is about understanding the kind of environment your brain really needs to thrive. And this leads us to another big modern myth we've got to bust: the idea that to be successful and happy, you have to be super social all the time. And this is where things get, well, a little weird. Researchers have found something they call the happiness paradox. For most of us, hanging out with friends gives us a big happiness boost. But a 2016 study found that for highly intelligent people, that effect is way weaker. And sometimes it can even go in the other direction, actually decreasing their life satisfaction. Now, it is absolutely critical to get this next part. This preference for being alone, it is not the same thing as being shy. Not at all. Shyness is about being afraid of what other people think. Introversion is just about how you manage your energy. Think of it like a battery. Introverts recharge in quiet, calm places, while big social events can drain their battery fast. It's about energy, not fear.
So what does this all mean in the real world? It means smart folks are often just really protective of their time and energy. They're not being antisocial, they're being strategic. They'd rather have one deep conversation than 100 bits of small talk. For them, a few really meaningful friendships are way more valuable than a huge social network.
Okay, so we've got two huge strategies, right? Walking and embracing quiet. And they both kind of go against what we're usually told to do. So the big question is, why do they work so well? To figure that out, we've got to look inside the brain. The moment you start walking, a couple of incredible things kick off inside your head. First, blood flow shoots up by about 25%, which is great. But even cooler, it activates something called the default mode network. You can think of it as your brain's imagination network. It's the part that's totally quiet when you're laser focused on a spreadsheet, but it's the absolute key to those aha moments. So walking basically lets your imagination out to play.
And what about that need for quiet? Well, it turns out that's not just a personality type either. The science shows it's hardwired right into our brain chemistry. There are actual physical differences in how introverted and extroverted brains are wired.
So let's break this down. The big idea is that introverts have naturally high cortical arousal. Just imagine their brain's volume knob is already turned way up, so they try to avoid extra noise to keep from getting overwhelmed. Extroverts, their knob is set lower, so they're out there looking for parties and excitement to turn it up. Even their brain chemistry is different. Introverts get their kicks from acetylcholine, linked to internal rewards, while extroverts chase that dopamine rush from new, external stuff.
So here's the kicker. For some people, especially really smart, engaged people, the reward they get from cracking a tough problem, that satisfying dopamine hit, is actually stronger than the one they'd get from socializing. The work itself becomes the most rewarding, most exciting thing they can do.
Okay, so this is all fascinating stuff, right? But what do we do with it? Let's talk about how to turn all this science into some simple strategies you can use, like today. So instead of just hoping for an aha moment to strike on your next walk, you can actually create a system for it. It's a super simple 4-step process. First, know what problem you're trying to solve. Then, go walk for at least 30 minutes and just let your mind wander. No forcing it. The second you get back, write down every single idea you had, and then finally, turn those ideas into actual action steps. And that second big strategy, it's all about changing how we think about being alone. We need to reframe it. Solitude isn't loneliness. That's a painful feeling. No, solitude is the presence of yourself. It's your quiet superpower, the time you need to recharge your batteries and do your deepest, clearest thinking. You know, when you think about it, Nietzsche really nailed it. Everything we've talked about, the walking, the quiet, it all points to one big, powerful truth. You get the best results when you stop fighting your brain and start working with its natural tendencies.
So I'm going to leave you with this question to think about. Our world is only getting louder and more distracting. The real advantage might just be knowing when to step away from your desk, move your body, and find some quiet. So where is your next big idea going to come from? The screen in front of you or the path outside your door?